Question 21 is a trig graphing question where it wants us to determine the period, amplitude, and how far away the x-intercepts are going to be spaced out based on this generic equation. So one thing about this equation is notice it does not have specific numbers for us. If we had specific numbers, we could graph it and look at the information. That might be easier to work with. But we have generic A and generic B. Alright, so when we talk about graphing a trig equation, most of the time it's going to be written like this, where this is A, and A, the absolute value of A determines the amplitude. So they left this A here, but even though there's a negative here, the negative actually just flipped it over the x-axis. It's not going to change the amplitude. So the amplitude of this is A. Fortunately, looking at our choices, there's still 3 choices that have A, and I guess it could still be E. So just knowing that little bit is not all that helpful. Okay, but if you notice these other parts, so this is going to shift the graph either up or down if you add or subtract something on the end, like all the other parent functions. This doesn't have that, so that doesn't really apply in this question. Let's not worry about it. But the coefficient of x is what we call B, and they put that over here. And then the other value is C. They put that here. So what I'd like to do, just to help me see that a little bit better, is I would like to switch the place of these two terms. Make it negative bx plus pi. Okay, so to determine, so the formula defined amplitude is absolute value of A. For sine and cosine, the formula defined period, which is how often a graph repeats, is going to be 2 pi over b. Now, just like this negative flips it over the x-axis and doesn't change much else about it, this negative would flip it over the y-axis, but that doesn't change how often the graph is going to repeat. It's still going to have the same period. So even if I plugged in a generic number b into the formula for b, then this is what you get for the period. Now that one's actually pretty useful because only one of these choices has that as an option. Choice C is the only one that says the period is 2 pi over b. Now, that formula defined period that way works for sine and cosine. It's not going to work for the other 4 trig functions. You've got to know some other stuff for that. And then finally, just to be sure that this is consistent and is not choice E, x-intercepts are spaced at pi over b unit intervals. Okay, so this value over here, often referred to as C, and this is what we call a phase shift. So if you want to shift the graph left or right, you're going to either add or subtract depending on which way you want it to go, and the formula for how much it's going to shift is C over B. Well, in this problem, B is B, and in this problem, C is pi. So the original sine graph, other than being flipped over the x-axis and flipped over the y-axis, is going to be shifted pi over b units. So to really verify that last part of the answer, you have to know what the parent sine function looks like. And that's not a very good graph, but it gives you the idea. This is what the sine function looks like. And notice it naturally has an x-intercept, y-intercept at the origin. So if we give this a phase shift of pi over b, then it's going to move it, well, you're going to have to be careful about which way you're reflecting it. So we don't really know if it's going to move left or right, but it's going to move it this much to pi over b, which is what they were saying. The x-intercepts are going to be spaced that far out. So all of the parts of C are correct. The amplitude is A because it's the absolute value of that. The period is 2 pi over b because the formula for period of sine is 2 pi over b, and in this case b is b. and the original parent function of sine graph has an origin at has an x-intercept at the origin, and it's going to have a phase shift of c over b. In this problem, that would be pi over b. So the x-intercept is going to move from the origin to instead being spaced out by pi over b units. So the answer to 21 should be C.